Hi, I'm Nadine Aisha-Jassett, and welcome to this video from the National Library of Scotland's Fresh Ink initiative, where 10 emerging writers create and share new work on their experience of 2020. Amy Jardine lives on the East Coast with her partner and son and her cat. She tries to write as often as she can, sometimes about small things like her cat, sometimes about big things, the internet, creativity, the future, good books that she has read. She's currently working on her first novel. Amy wraps her piece Night Swimming around the reader, and as she travels landscapes of place, but also of self, and the intertwining of themes around faith and storytelling is touching and meditative, told with a magical tone as she brings us into her world. Here's Amy reading an extract from her piece, Night Swimming.
Hello, this is Amy Jardine and this is my piece, Night Swimming. It was the 11th of March when the World Health Organization declared a pandemic, but for weeks before that, a feeling of unease was transmitted around the world. In January, it seemed that a war was coming between the US and Iran. Fires raged in Australia. I spoke to a friend there who was all but trapped indoors some days, the air outside filled with ash. The National Health Commission in China reported a third death from the new virus. Then the Pope slapped a woman's hand after she grabbed him. This footage caught the imagination of the young. It was perfect for meme culture, that celebration of weird messaging, images and stories that could be either cryptic or inane. The joke was that the world's end was signalled by a moment of rash irritation from a man appointed as God's representative on earth. Or perhaps the real joke, the joke behind it all, was the insistence on interpreting this impulsive moment as highly meaningful. News of the virus kept arriving, and meanwhile, in increments of memes and tweets, fragmented online dialogue, a feeling was spreading that the world was wobbling. Memes about a plague kept forming and dispersing. This was more than the performative nihilism, I'm tired of living in unprecedented times, of much online culture. There was a nervy edge to it. The declaration of a pandemic broke the spell. The caustic, speculative chatter on Twitter gave way, and instead I saw updates and comments that were unambiguous and urgent. There was no need for gestures anymore, because the audience was not bored. We were frightened. Full lockdown was implemented in the UK soon after, and it seemed that the world went silent overnight. Now there were narratives being told across the media about connection and causation, about rescue and hope. They competed with the bleak reports of the spread of COVID. Air pollution plummeted, and this was reported as a glimpse into a possible future without a fossil fuel industry. In this story, the virus would help us make the leap in attitude needed to restore a healthy environment. I'm very conflicted about this, said the author of one analysis. People are dying. What was unsaid, but painfully clear, was the spectre of many more deaths to come from man-made climate change. The virus was a ghost version of our future. I was drawn to this idea and its compellingly mythic undertone. I wonder what the birds think of all this, I said to Dan, as he and I sat in the garden looking up at a blue sky, no longer crisscrossed by plane trails. He was unconvinced that the birds had opinions about all this. I wondered what they saw from their privileged view, all those roads and suddenly hardly any cars. The prevailing theory at the time was that COVID-19 originated in the unclean conditions of a live animal market where wild animals were slaughtered before their buyers. It was easy to make a connection between the virus and our callousness. Logically, I knew that infectious diseases have no moral dimension, no lesson to impart. They just are. Nevertheless, I yearned to make meaning. I tried out another story. Perhaps the natural world had conjured a disease to show us its formidable and inescapable superiority. We'd been hemmed into our homes, stopped in our tracks, and made to see that the birds would continue to soar without us. I was toying with stories as if surviving a pandemic was a cerebral exercise. I knew what I was doing too. I was looking for magical intent in a world which was really terrifyingly arbitrary. As I grew round, I became ever more self-absorbed. I told myself, we are safe in this garden. The virus belonged to the outside world, and the outside world had receded. The sun shone almost every day that spring, and the air was clear. I lay sunning myself on a blanket on the lawn, communing peacefully with the feeling of heaviness, and marvelling at my body, in which another life also lived. The noise of traffic had gone, and I liked the idea of a hush descending before our son's arrival. I lay in the heat and thought of the quiet of a church interior, contemplative, anticipatory, extraordinary. I was woken by the first labour pains at 5 in the morning, one day in June. There was just a little discomfort, a not unusual cramping sensation, but I turned to Dan and said, "This is it now." By the evening we were tearing down the motorway toward the hospital. By then the pain was surging, and I felt it everywhere, even my face, even my fingertips. I said, "I miss my mum," thought, "fuck lockdown," and burst into tears. Danger had broken in. I had reached a point of such vulnerability that I could not glide on, complacent and unthinking, any longer. Illness and early pregnancy had forced me to understand the connection between our thoughts and our bodies, but this was nothing compared to the unravelling of the mind that giving birth entailed. The room we were in was dimly lit, that much wasn't my imagination, but I soon realised that the process of labour meant entering a profound and otherworldly darkness. The pain that came in enormous waves was so arresting that the rest of the world ceased to exist. Entonox rocketed through my body and I lost my grip on time, so that it rushed and then lagged. The midwives and doctors were distracted and exhausted, the corridors were empty, and everyone was wearing masks, which led me, in my delirium, to believe that I recognised the nurses from some other time and place. Déjà vu persisted. I said to Dan, "I've done this before. Hasn't this happened before?" Most frightening of all, the people I loved, family and friends, became temporarily abstract. They existed in another world, beyond a drawn curtain, in a different dream. I'd always dismissed the hokum that surrounds labour and birth as feminist kitsch. Birth as a site of female dominion, even bonding, it was so schmaltzy. Too convenient by far. Once I was in the midst of it, I understood the aura of witchcraft around midwifery. The risks are so great, still, even now, and our ability to mitigate the danger is patchy. The fragility of a baby and the violence of their entrance into life was a shock, no matter how much I thought I knew. It is one of those parts of life where we are still beholden to our essential animal nature, the inescapable bedrock savagery of living in a body. All we have to soothe ourselves is magical thinking. I held on to Dan with an iron grip. He was my only connection with the real world beyond my dream and the time on the clock. In moments of exhaustion between each contraction, I met our son in my mind and asked him to be safe and stay with us. He was born at 4 in the afternoon. I was numb from the arms down. Magical thinking had given way to an epidural and a forceps delivery. So he was placed on my chest and my arms were arranged around him. I felt his small weight and his breath against my skin. Everyone had told me there would be a rush of love, and I had fretted. What if there wasn't? It turned out that it wasn't up to my mind to dither over it. It was a bodily feeling, wordless. It turned out that the altering of the world during childbirth, time at a slant, everything hushed, never went away. The early days were mostly as people said they would be, no sleep, many small panics, but that was only part of the story. I was told it was adrenaline and oxytocin that helped me stay awake, lost in love, and I agreed, although I knew something more mysterious was happening. Another mum of a little baby boy told me, "Everything makes sense now that he's here," and my heart sang with recognition. Each time I woke up in a daze, I would look at the little being asleep by my side and feel quiet excitement like a flame igniting. I was able to keep going at any hour of the day or night because I had discovered inside of myself an inexhaustible, ordinary, plodding, limitless strength. This was faith, and it was in my body at last. It was at last undoubtable, unquestionable, that love is the greater part of our existence.